Alright, so we are in chapter 20 of the Hunger Games. But before we start, guys, I do want to say that we are entering the part of the book where the romance is more focused on. So when we started the Hunger Games, I did mention that there is going to be romance in this book. No, and that's actually one of the reasons why a lot of people enjoy it. It's not just action, it's not just cool, but also because of the romance element in it. And so I want to teach you guys, alright, how to properly handle romance when you're reading it in a book. Okay, especially since, guys, unfortunately, when in the romance here in this book, there are going to be kissing parts. Especially in the last chapter we read, there were already kissing parts, you know? And so I want you to be responsible readers. I want you to be careful readers. And I think that when there are romance and when there is like a kissing part in a book, how should you handle it? Okay, what should you do about it? All right, and there are two wrong ways you can handle it. And I think the first wrong way you can handle it is to really be like, ew, it's so gross, ew, ew, ew. And then you're always just saying it's gross and you're saying romance is icky, okay? And it's like, ew, like that's a very childish way of handling it, no? Another wrong way you can handle it is that you get obsessed with it where you're like, oh, the romance is so nice, and you just keep reading the love parts over and over again, and you keep looking at the kissing parts and the romance parts. Those are really, I think, two wrong ways to handle it, okay? So my advice is, when you're reading a book and if ever there's whenever there's like a kissing part or something, just skip it, okay? Just skip it. Or if you accidentally read it, then just move on, okay? Don't obsess over it. Don't keep rereading it and be like, oh, this part, okay? Just skip it, okay? It's similar to when if we film showing a movie and there's a kissing part, you just look away, you don't watch it, you don't rewind it over and over again. It's not a big deal. Just skip it. Go over it, okay? There are more important things discussed in the book. Now, it is okay if you do get kilig while you're reading the parts where they're talking, because this book, good, you will like a couple, good, no? Some of you may already like it. Maybe you are already shipping Katniss and Peeta together, and you're like, oh, I hope they end up together. That's a good thing, no? And if your classmates are acting like that and saying, oh my, Katniss and Peeta, they should be together, don't make them feel bad about it. Don't be like, ew, that's so gross, or tease them about it, okay? That's a very childish way of handling it. But also, don't be so obsessed with it where you're like, oh, I wanna have a love like this, or oh, I want a Peeta, I want a Katniss in my life, and that's all you start thinking about already. There are more important things in life to focus on. Focus on being a student, focus on being a son or a daughter, focus on those things, focus on being a good friend. Don't be so obsessed with girlfriend, boyfriend, that type of thing, no? Because as the Hunger Games will show you, it's very complicated and it's very confusing. And Katniss and Peeta, they are a lot older than you guys, okay? You guys are, what, 12, 13 years old? So it is really, romance is not something to play around with. It's dangerous. Like the weapons in the Hunger Games, no? You have to be careful with romance. Good, you have to know how to use it. And being the age that you are not ready for it yet, okay? You are not ready to actually feel those feelings. However, it's fun to read about it, okay? It's fun to read about it. And if you feel like they're so cute together, that's really fine. Just don't be obsessed about it, and don't like want it like, oh, I want it for myself right now. I want to have a girlfriend, or I want to have a boyfriend, even though you are still in high school, you are still very young. All right? So that should not be your focus, okay? Because again, it's dangerous. Like the weapons in the Hunger Games, it is dangerous. And I just want to make that disclaimer, because as we read it, if ever there's a kissing part, I might skip it, or I just might read through it quickly and just leave it behind, okay? Don't be so like, ew, or don't also be so like, it's so nice, okay? So you have to be balanced, and I wanted to make that little disclaimer as we read on, all right? Because I don't want the romance to ruin on the the book for you. The romance should add to the book. It adds an extra flavor to the book. No, and it's fun. Honestly, personally, as a dude, I find it fun to read the romantic parts, where they're talking, and it's, I don't know. I think it's obvious by now. I think you know that I ship Katniss and Peeta, no? I'm Team Peeta forever. I think Katniss should. I have opinions about Katniss and Peeta and whether they should end up together or not. I love the romance in this book, yun. Except for the kissing parts. I don't like the kissing part, so I either skip it or I just go over it quickly. Alright? Alright. Let's start. That was a long disclaimer. I'm sorry, but I had to say it as your lit teacher. So, chapter 20. Getting the broth into Peeta takes an hour of coaxing, begging, threatening, and yes, kissing, but finally, sip by sip, he empties the pot. I let him drift off to sleep then and attend to my own needs, wolfing down a supper of grusling and roots, while I watched the daily report in the sky. No new casualties. Still, Peeta and I have given the audience a fairly interesting day. Hopefully, the game makers will allow us a peaceful night. I automatically look around for a good tree to nest in before I realize that's over. At least for a while. I can't very well leave Peeta unguarded on the ground. I left the scene of his last hiding place on the bank of the stream untouched. How could I conceal it? And we're a scant 50 yards downstream. I put on my glasses, place my weapons in readiness, and settle down to keep watch. The temperature drops rapidly, and soon I'm chilled to the bone. Eventually, I give in and slide into the sleeping bag with Peeta. It's toasty warm, and I snuggle down gratefully until I realize it's more than warm. It's overly hot because the bag is reflecting back his fever. I check his forehead and find it burning and dry. I don't know what to do. Leave him in the bag and hope the excessive heat breaks the fever? Take him out and hope the night air cools him off? I end up just dampening a strip of bandage and placing it on his forehead. It seems weak, but I'm afraid to do anything too drastic. I spend the night half sitting, half lying next to Peeta, refreshing the bandage, and trying not to dwell on the fact that by teaming up with him, I've made myself far more vulnerable than when I was alone. Tethered to the ground, on guard, with a very sick person to take care of. But I knew he was injured, and still I came after him. I'm just going to have to trust that whatever instinct sent me to find him was a good one. When the sky turns rosy, I notice the sheen of sweat on Peeta's lip and discover the fever has broken. He's not back to normal, but it's come down a few degrees. Last night, when I was gathering vines, I came upon a bush of rose berries. I strip off the fruit and mash it up in the broth pot with cold water. Peeta's struggling to get up when I reach the cave. I woke up and you were gone, he says. I was worried about you. Oy. I have to laugh as I ease him back down. You were worried about me? Have you taken a look at yourself lately? I thought Cato and Clove might have found you. They like to hunt at night, he says, still serious. Clove, which one is that? I ask. The girl from District 2. She's still alive, right? He says. Yes, there's just them and us and Thresh and Foxface. I say, that's what I nicknamed the girl from 5. How do you feel? Better than yesterday. This is an enormous improvement over the mud, he says. Clean clothes and medicine and a sleeping bag, and you. Oh right, the whole romance thing. I reach out to touch his cheek and he catches my hand and presses it against his lips. I remember my father doing this very thing to my mother, and I wonder where Peeta picked it up. Surely not from his father and the witch. No more kisses for you until you've eaten, I say. We get him propped up against the wall, and he obediently swallows the spoonfuls of the berry mush I feed him. He refuses the grusling again, though. You didn't sleep, Peeta says. I'm all right, I say, but the truth is, I'm exhausted. Sleep now, I'll keep watch. I'll wake you if anything happens, he says. I hesitate. Katniss, you can't stay up forever. He's got a point there. I'll have to sleep eventually, and probably better to do it now when he seems relatively alert and we have daylight on our side. All right, I say, but just for a few hours, then you wake me. It's too warm for the sleeping bag now. I smooth it out on the cave floor and lie down, one hand on my loaded bow in case I have to shoot at the moment's notice. Peeta sits beside me, leaning against the wall, his bad legs stretched out before him, his eyes trained on the world outside. Go to sleep, he says softly. His hand brushes the loose strands of my hair off my forehead. Unlike the staged kisses and caresses so far, this gesture seems natural and comforting. I don't want him to stop, and he doesn't. He's still stroking my hair when I fall asleep. Too long. I sleep too long. I know from the moment I open my eyes that we're into the afternoon. Pita's right beside me, his position unchanged. I sit up, feeling somehow defensive, but better rested than I've been in days. Pita, you were supposed to wake me after a couple of hours, I say. For what? Nothing's going on here, he says. Besides, I like watching you sleep. You don't scowl. Improves your looks a lot. This, of course, brings on a scowl that makes him grin. That's when I notice how dry his lips are. I test his cheek, hot as a coal stove. He claims he's been drinking, but the containers still feel full to me. I gave him more fever pills and stand over him while he drinks first one, then a second quart of water. Then I tend to his minor wound, the burns, the stings, which are showing improvement. I steel myself and unwrap the leg. My heart drops into my stomach. It's worse, much worse. There's no more pus in evidence, but the swelling has increased and the tight, shiny skin is inflamed. Then I see the red streak starting to crawl up his legs. Blood poisoning. Unchecked, it will kill him for sure. My chewed up leaves and ointment won't make a dent in it. We'll need strong anti-infection drugs from the capital. I can't imagine the cost of such potent medicine. If Hamish pooled every donation from every sponsor, would he have enough? I doubt it. Gifts go up in price the longer the games continue. What buys a full meal on day 1 buys a cracker on day 12, and the kind of medicine Pita needs would have been at a premium from the beginning. Well, there's more swelling, but the pus is gone, I say in an unsteady voice. I know what blood poisoning is, Katniss, says Pita, even if my mother isn't a healer. You're just going to have to outlast the others, Pita. They'll cure it back at the capital when we win, I say. Yes, that's a good plan, he says, but I feel this is mostly for my benefit. You have to eat. Keep your strength up. I'm going to make you soup, I say. Don't light the fire, he says. It's not worth it. We'll see, I say, as I take the pot down to the stream. I'm struck by how brutally hot it is. I swear the game makers are progressively ratcheting up the temperature in the daytime and sending it plummeting at night. The heat of the sun-baked stones by the stream gives me an idea, though. Maybe I won't need to light the fire. I settle down on a big flat rock halfway between the stream and the cave. After purifying half a pot of water, I place it in direct sunlight and add several egg-sized hot stones to the water. I'm the first to admit I'm not much of a cook, but since soup mainly involves tossing everything in a pot and waiting, it's one of my better dishes. I mince grusling until it's practically mush and mash some of Roo's roots. Fortunately, they've been roasted already, so they mostly need to be heated up. Already between the sunlight and the rocks, the water's warm. I put in the meat and root, swap in fresh rocks, and go find something green to spice it up a little. Before long, I discover a tuft of chives growing at the base of some rocks. Perfect. I chop them very fine and add them to the pot. Switch out the rocks again, put on the lid, and let the whole thing stew. I've seen very few signs of game around, but I don't feel comfortable leaving Pita alone while I hunt. So I rig half a dozen snares and I hope I get lucky. I wonder about the other tributes, how they're managing now that their main source of food has been blown up. At least 3 of them, Cato, Clave, and Foxface, had been relying on it. Probably not Thresh, though. I've got the feeling he must share some of Rue's knowledge on how to feed yourself from the earth. Are they fighting each other? Looking for us? Maybe one of them has located us and is just waiting for the right moment to attack. The idea sends me back to the cave. Pita stretched out on top of the sleeping bag in the shade of the rocks. Although he brightens a bit when I come in, it's clear he feels miserable. I put cool cloths on his head, but they warm up almost as soon as they touch his skin. Do you want anything? I ask. No, he says. Thank you. Wait, yes. Tell me a story. A story? What about? I say. I'm not much for storytelling. It's kind of like singing, but once in a while Prim wheedles one out of me. Something happy. Tell me about the happiest day you can remember, says Pita. Something between a sigh and a huff of exasperation leaves my mouth. A happy story? This will require a lot more effort than the soup. I rack my brains for good memories. Most of them involve Gale and me out hunting, and somehow I don't think these will play well with either Pita or the audience. That leaves Prim. Did I ever tell you about how I got Prim's goat? I ask. Pita shakes his head and looks at me expectantly, so I begin, but carefully, because my words are going out all over Pan Am. And while people have no doubt put two and two together that I hunt illegally, I don't want to hurt Gale or Greasy Say or the butcher or even the peacekeepers back home who are my customers by publicly announcing they're breaking the law too. Here's the real story of how I got the money for Prim's goat lady. It was a Friday evening, the day before Prim's 10th birthday in late May. As soon as school ended, Gale and I hit the woods because I wanted to get enough to trade for a present for Prim. Maybe some new cloth for a dress or a hairbrush. Our snares had done well enough and the woods were flush with greens, but this was really no more than our average Friday night haul. I was disappointed as we headed back, even though Gale said we'd be sure to do better tomorrow. We were resting a moment by a stream when we saw him, a young buck, probably a yearling by his size. His antlers were just growing in, still small and coated in velvet. Poised to run, but unsure of us, unfamiliar with humans. Beautiful. Less beautiful perhaps when the two arrows caught him, one in the neck, the other in the chest. Gale and I had shot at the same time. The buck tried to run, but stumbled, and Gale's knife slit his throat before he knew what had happened. Momentarily, I'd felt a pang at killing something so fresh and innocent. And then my stomach rumbled at the thought of all that fresh and innocent meat. A deer! Gale and I have only brought down 3 in all. The first one, a doe, that had injured her leg somehow, almost didn't count. But we knew from that experience not to go dragging the carcass into the hob. It had caused chaos with people bidding on parts and actually trying to hack off pieces themselves. Greasy Say had intervened and sent us with our deer to the butcher, but not before it had been badly damaged, hunks of meat taken, the hide riddled with holes. Although everybody paid up fairly, it had lowered the value of the kill. This time we waited until dark fell and slipped under a hole in the fence close to the butcher. Even though we were known hunters, it wouldn't have been good to go carrying a 150-pound deer through the streets of District 12 in daylight like we were rubbing it in the officials' faces. The butcher, a short, chunky woman named Ruba, came to the back door when we knocked. You don't haggle with the Ruba. She gives you one price, which you can take or leave, but it's a fair price. We took her offer on the deer, and she threw in a couple of venison steaks we could pick up after the butchering. Even with the money divided in two, neither Gale nor I had held so much at one time in our lives. We decided to keep it a secret and surprise our families with the meat and money at the end of the next day. This is where I really got the money for the goat, but I tell Pita I sold an old silver locket of my mother's. That can't hurt anyone. Then I pick up the story in the late afternoon of Prim's birthday. Gale and I went to the market on the square so that I could buy dress materials. As I was running my fingers over a length of thick blue cotton cloth, something caught my eye. There's an old man who keeps a small herd of goats on the other side of the seam. I don't know his real name, everyone just calls him the Goat Man. His joints are swollen and twisted in painful angles, and he's got a hacking cough that proves he spent years in the mines. But he's lucky. Somewhere along the way, he saved up enough for these goats, and now has something to do in his old age. Besides slowly starve to death. He's filthy and impatient, but the goats are clean and their milk is rich if you can afford it. One of the goats, a white one with black patches, was lying down in a cart. It was easy to see why. Something, probably a dog, had mauled her shoulder and infection had set in. It was bad. The goat man had to hold her up to milk her, but I thought I knew someone who could fix it. Gale, I whispered, I want that goat for Prim. Owning a nanny goat can change your life in District 12. The animals can live off almost anything. The meadow's a perfect feeding place, and they can give 4 quarts of milk a day, to drink, to make into cheese, to sell. It's not even against the law. She's hurt pretty bad, said Gale. We better take a closer look. We went over and bought a cup of milk to share, then stood over the goat as if idly curious. Let her be, said the man. Just looking, said Gale. Well, look fast. She goes to the butcher soon. Hardly anyone will buy her milk, and then they only pay half price, said the man. "What's the butcher giving for her?" I asked. The man shrugged. "Hang around and see." I turned and saw Ruba coming across the square toward us. "Lucky thing you showed up," said the goat man when she arrived. "Girl's got her eye on your goat." "Not if she's spoken for," I said carelessly. Ruba looked me up and down, then frowned at the goat. "She's not. Look at that shoulder. Bet you half the carcass will be too rotten for even sausage." "What?" said the goat man. "We had a deal." "We had a deal on an animal with a few teeth marks." "Not that thing. Sell her to the girl if she's stupid enough to take her," said Ruba. As she marched off, I caught her wink. The goat man was mad, but he still wanted that goat off his hands. It took us half an hour to agree on the price. Quite a crowd had gathered by then to hand out opinions. It was an excellent deal if the goat lived. I'd been robbed if she died. People took sides in the argument, but I took the goat. Gale offered to carry her. I think he wanted to see the look on Prim's face as much as I did. In a moment of complete giddiness, I bought a pink ribbon and tied it around her neck. Then we hurried back to my house. You should have seen Prim's reaction when we walked in with that goat. Remember, this is a girl who wept to save that awful old Buttercup. She was so excited she started crying and laughing all at once. My mother was less sure, seeing the injury, but the pair of them went to work on it, grinding up herbs and coaxing brews down the animal's throat. "They sound like you," says Pita. I had almost forgotten he was there. "Oh no, Pita, they work magic. That thing couldn't have died if it tried," I say, but then I bite my tongue, realizing what that must sound like to Pita, who is dying, in my incompetent hands. "Don't worry, I'm not trying," he jokes. Finish the story. Well, that's it, only I remember that night, Prim insisted on sleeping with Lady on a blanket next to the fire. And just before they drifted off, the goat licked her cheek like it was giving her a good night's kiss or something, I say. It was already mad about her. "Was it still wearing the pink ribbon?" he asks. "I think so," I say. "Why?" "I'm just trying to get a picture," he says thoughtfully. "I can see why that day made you happy." "Well, I knew that goat would be a little gold mine," I say. "Yes, of course I was referring to that, not the lasting joy you gave the sister you loved so much you took her place in the reaping," says Pita dryly. "The goat has paid for itself several times over," I say in a superior tone. "Well, it wouldn't dare do anything else after you saved its life," says Pita. "I intend to do the same thing." "Really? What did you cost me again?" I ask. "A lot of trouble. Don't worry, you'll get it all back," he says. "You're not making sense," I say. I test his forehead. The fever's going nowhere but up. "You're a little cooler, though." The sound of the trumpet startles me. I'm on my feet and at the mouth of the cave in a flash, not wanting to miss a syllable. It's my new best friend, Claudius Templesmith, and as I expected, he's inviting us to a feast. Alright, a feast. Katniss mentioned this in the past, no? She did mention that a feast is when the game makers try to gather the surviving tributes in one place. When there are a few tributes and there's not a lot of action, the game makers put out a feast. No, they put out a lot of food, a lot of supplies, so that the tributes who are still alive will all gather in the same place, and there will be a little bit of action. There will be a little bit of violence. And it comes right after Katniss's story about the goat, which honestly, guys, I find this story a little boring. No, I don't know if you did. Maybe you enjoyed it. It's nice. It was nice to have a break from the games, no, and to have this memory of Prim's birthday, and they bought her a goat, and all of that, and it was a nice moment and all of that. Personally, I found it a little boring. Okay, but I'm happy if you enjoyed it, and it was a nice break. It was a nice break, and it was also important that we remember Gale, okay, because Gale was in the beginning of this, and a lot of you even were kind of saying, maybe Katniss will fall in love with Gale, and so now that we're all very focused on Pita and Katniss's relationship, it's good to remember that Gale is back home taking care of Katniss's family. So let's not forget Gale. And I think Susan Collins added this chapter in to remind us, that don't forget Gale. He's back home. And let's not forget that he's a very close friend of Katniss's. Okay? He might even like her a little bit. Well, we're not that... as I expected, he's inviting us to a feast. Well, we're not that hungry, and I actually wave his offer away in indifference when he says, "Now hold on, some of you may already be declining my invitation, but this is no ordinary feast. Each of you needs something desperately. I do need something desperately. Something to heal Pita's leg. Each of you will find that something in a backpack marked with your district number at the cornucopia at dawn. Think hard about refusing to show up. For some of you, this will be your last chance, says Claudius. There's nothing else, just his words hanging in the air. I jump as Pita grips my shoulder from behind. No, he says, you're not risking your life for me. Okay, so they're offering medicine for Pita. They said, all of you need something, and it's going to be in a backpack in the cornucopia. Come and get it at dawn if you want it. And Katniss, obviously, she wants to get the medicine for Pita, but Pita doesn't want her to know. He says, no, you're not going to that. It's too dangerous. Who said I was, I say. So you're not going, he asks. Of course I'm not going. Give me some credit. Do you think I'm running straight into some free-for-all against Cato and Cloven Thresh? Don't be stupid, I say, helping him back to bed. I'll let them fight it out. We'll see who's in the sky tomorrow night and work out the plan from there. You're such a bad liar, Katniss. I don't know how you've survived this long. He begins to mimic me. I knew that goat would be a little gold mine. You're a little cooler, though. Of course I'm not going. He shakes his head. Never gamble at cards. You'll lose your last coin, he says. So Katniss is like, I'm not gonna go, Bitaw. I wasn't gonna go. And Pita is like, oh my gosh, you're so bad at lying. Anger flushes my face. All right, I am going, and you can't stop me. I can follow you, at least part way. I may not make it to the cornucopia, but if I'm yelling your name, I bet someone can find me, and then I'll be dead for sure, he says. You won't get 100 yards from here on that leg, I say. Then I'll drag myself, says Pita. You go, and I'm going too. He's just stubborn enough, and maybe just strong enough to do it. Come howling after me in the woods. Even if a tribute doesn't find him, something else might. He can't defend himself. I'd probably have to wall him up in the cave just to go myself, and who knows what exertion will do to him. What am I supposed to do? Sit here and watch you die, I say. He must know that's not an option, that the audience would hate me, and frankly, I would hate myself too if I didn't even try. I won't die, I promise, if you promise not to go, he says. We're at something of a stalemate. I know I can't argue him out of this one, so I don't try. I pretend reluctantly to go along. Then you have to do what I say. Drink your water, wake me when I tell you, and eat every bite of the soup, no matter how disgusting it is, I snap at him. Agreed. Is it ready? He asks. Wait here, I say. The air's gone cold even though the sun's still up. I'm right about the game makers messing with the temperature. I wonder if the thing someone needs desperately is a good blanket. The soup is still nice and warm in its iron pot, and actually doesn't taste too bad. Pita eats without complaint, even scraping out the pot to show his enthusiasm. He rambles on about how delicious it is, which should be encouraging if you don't know what fever does to people. He's like listening to Haymitch before the alcohol has soaked him into incoherence. I give him another dose of fever medicine before he goes off his head completely. As I go down to the stream to wash up, all I can think is that he's going to die if I don't get to that feast. I'll keep him going for a day or two, and then the infection will reach his heart or his brain or his lungs, and he'll be gone. And I'll be here all alone, again, waiting for the others. I'm so lost in thought that I almost miss the parachute. Even though it floats right by me, then I spring after it, yanking it from the water, tearing off the silver fabric to retrieve the vial. Haymitch has done it. He's gotten the medicine. I don't know how, persuaded some gaggle of romantic fools to sell their jewels, and I can save Pita. It's such a tiny vial, though. It must be very strong to cure someone as ill as Pita. A ripple of doubt runs through me. I uncork the vial and take a deep sniff. My spirits fall at the sickly sweet scent. Just to be sure, I place a drop on the tip of my tongue. There's no question. It's sleep syrup. It's a common medicine in District 12, cheap as medicine goes, but very addictive. Almost everyone's had a dose at one time or another. We have some in a bottle at home. My mother gives it to hysterical patients to knock them out, to stitch up a bad wound, or quiet their minds, or just to help someone in pain get through the night. It only takes a little. A vial this size could knock Pita out for a full day. But what good is that? I'm so furious I'm about to throw Haymitch's last offering into the stream when it hits me. A full day. That's more than I need. So Haymitch sent her something, but it's not medicine. It's something that puts people to sleep, no? It's very strong and very sweet, and it puts people to sleep. And Katniss knows that Haymitch sent this to her because he wants her to use it on Peeta so that Peeta will fall asleep and Katniss can go to the feast and get the real medicine that he needs. I mash up a handful of berries so the taste won't be as noticeable and add some mint leaves for good measure. Then I head back up to the cave. I have brought you a treat. I found a new patch of berries a little farther downstream. Peeta opens his mouth for the first bite without hesitation. He swallows, then frowns slightly. They're very sweet. Yes, they're sugar berries. My mother makes jam from them. Haven't you ever had them before? I say, poking the next spoonful in his mouth. No, he says, almost puzzled. But they taste familiar. Sugar berries? Well, you can't get them in the market much. They only grow wild, I say. Another mouthful goes down. Just one more to go. They're sweet as syrup, he says, taking the last spoonful. Syrup. His eyes widen as he realizes the truth. I clamp my hand over his mouth and nose hard, forcing him to swallow instead of spit. He tries to make himself vomit the stuff up, but it's too late. He's already losing consciousness. Even as he fades away, I can see in his eyes what I've done is unforgivable. I sit back on my heels and look at him with a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. A stray berry strains his chin and I swipe it away. Who can't lie, Peeta, I say, even though he can't hear me. It doesn't matter. The rest of Pan Am can. So Katniss gives him the sleep syrup and now Peeta is asleep. And now Katniss has to go to the feast. It's so scary. She has to go to the feast where all the other tributes who are still alive, they will be there as well. We have Foxface, we have Thresh, we have Kato, and we have Clove. And they're all gonna be in one place at dawn. That is chapter 20.